Good evening. I'll call the August 3rd Select Board meeting to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we have everyone present, so we won't have to do roll call votes tonight, which is great. And I will turn it over to Libby Gibson for announcements.
This meeting is being audio and video recorded. We have a review of applications for appointments to several committees in accordance with the Select Board's committee appointment policy. And I think, Erica, you're going to read those names?
Yes. And I will screen share them so people can see them as well. So for the Agricultural Commission, we have 4 seats available and 2 applicants, Charity Benz and Pamela Perrin. For the Contract Review Subcommittee, we have 1 seat available and 1 applicant, Dorothy Hertz, who, as I said last time, was actually an incumbent and just had applied late. Council for Human Services, 1 seat available, 2 applicants. Joseline Ramirez, same thing, was an incumbent who applied late, and new applicant Suzanne Keating. The Finance Committee, we have 1 seat available and 3 applicants. Stephen Morey, who was the incumbent who applied late, Jeremy Bloomer, and Joseph Wright. I would like, well, I'll add it on the next one. HDC Associate, we have 1 seat available and 1 applicant, Constance Patton, who's a new applicant. And the Zoning Board of Appeals, 1 seat available, 1 applicant, James Mondani. He was the incumbent who applied late. And then, do you want me to go right into the next one also?
Yeah, and just to remind people that at the board's next meeting on August 17th, the applicants for those committees will be able to introduce themselves.
Yes, and you'll be making the appointment on that date, on the 17th. So that is kind of what we're calling the round 2. And then we have a round 3 to address the last couple of committee vacancies that we have. We have already advertised the vacancies on the town's website. The announcement is tonight, and it will be on August 17th. It will be in the Inky tomorrow and August 11th, and applications are due at noon on August 26th, and it's for the Agricultural Commission, the 2 seats, terms expiring 2023, Finance Committee, 1 seat, term expiring 2024, and the Tree Advisory Committee, 2 seats, terms expiring 2025. We'll have any applications in the packet on September 7th and September 14th. Just so that the public has an opportunity to see who has applied, and you are scheduled to do those appointments if we have any applications on September 21st. I did reach out to the 3 Finance Committee applicants that we currently have for the 2025 seat and let them know that we have this additional seat. So they know that one of the applicants has asked me to keep his name in if he doesn't make it in round 2.
Thank you. And the next announcement relates to the short-term rental work group. And I think between Brooke and Erica, we're going to review the available seats in the appointment timeline.
So I'll just say that the timeline is essentially the same as the round 3. Pretty much the same. Noting the vacancies are this week and August 17th. It'll be in the paper tomorrow and August 11th. Applications are due August 26th at noon. Any applicants we get, their applications will be in the select board packets on September 7th and 14th. On September 21st, those applicants can review their applications with the board and appointments will be made at that time. But, and then I will hand it over to Brooke.
So I'm going to add some detail to that. The short-term rental pre-group met this afternoon and finalized the framework. And I'm just going to review how the seats will be appointed for the short-term rental work group. What's going to happen is there are groups or boards that will have a designated seat. They will each nominate 3 people, and the appointing authority will choose a primary and an alternate person to serve on the short-term rental work group. And those groups are the Planning Board, the Finance Committee, the Advisory Committee of Non-Voting Taxpayers, Act Now, Nantucket Together. There will be an affordable housing advocate chosen by a group called the, oh my God, the name's going to escape me. It'll come to me when I'm not trying to remember, but it's a group that meets, Housing Stakeholders Work Group, that has been meeting monthly for years, that is representative of all the housing groups on Nantucket. And then there will be 3 at-large members that will be picked from the community at large, and 1 alternate will be chosen. And then there will be someone designated by the Board of Health, and that will be a non-voting seat. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the application process. We're going to start with the regular committee application, which is available online and will be linked to the outreach from Erica this coming week. But we will be adding some additional documents for applicants to fill out. They need to be vetted by town council in the next week or so. And so people are welcome to begin applying using that base form that we use for all committees, and then you will be sent or notified that the additional documents are ready to complete.
I have a question. Previously, NARAB had a representative who was ex officio. How will they be involved going forward?
So because of the conflict of interest analysis by town council, it was determined that folks in the real estate industry cannot deliberate or serve in any capacity on the group, but we know NARAB is a source of a lot of information and data, so they will be among the groups that the experts that will be consulted as the process moves forward.
Thank you.
No, not yet.
We're not there yet.
We're not quite there, Penny. There will be no select board meeting next week, summer schedule. And we've got 2 announcements that came in late that didn't make it onto the agenda. One is that we've had a website redesign. The town website has been redesigned, and so hopefully people will go check it out. It looks really good. I don't think we did a link to show it, but thank you very much to our public outreach coordinator, Florencia Rulo, for developing that and working with others to get it up and running. And I think the sewer director has a request that came in sort of suddenly.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. David Gray, sewer director. We've had some manholes over the summer that the frames have cracked and they become a safety hazard. And we have a couple of plates on Pleasant Street right now that people have probably seen. And what I'm looking to do is try to do that work between 7 o'clock and 10 o'clock at night. Try to stay under the noise bylaw, but just so we can get out of the way of traffic, try to get in and get out. We had another one on Hooper Farm Road we did a week ago, and it was pretty hectic to try to do that during the day. So I'm just looking to let the public know and to seek if there was any comments from the board that would be in favor or opposing that. I just want to get out of the way of the traffic and try to there's a couple on Pleasant Street. We have a couple around, but we're just going to be doing some work between like 7 o'clock at night and 10 o'clock. So
I'd much rather have you do it when it's not going to cause as much disruption.
I
personally.
hope so.
No, I agree. The question I have, I saw you had a comment about the size of the trucks is damaging these now.
But just there's so many trucks and just the vehicles alone, and a lot of the manholes and the stuff that we're working on now, we're over 100 years old.
Right.
And what's happening is the old bricks are cracking and making the cover pitch a little bit, and it's just forcing the old cast iron to crack. So we have a bunch of new ones in stock, and we're doing, instead of using the old red bricks and the old cement bricks, we use HDPE rings that actually give a little bit of flex to it, which seems to be working very well.
So once they're in, they'll.
Once
hold
they're
up
in,
a
they
little
kind of
better.
give you a little more flex, and we do everything with flowable fill, or it's concrete, and then we pave them afterwards. So,
Yeah.
but it's
That's what I was going to ask. Okay, great.
and then the only other thing I had is, just so that everyone knows, we've been getting a lot of complaints and a lot of calls on odor control problems down on Hubbard Avenue and Easton Street. I think Jeff and everyone else has also been getting calls. It's not the sewer, although everyone's calling us saying it is. It's the seaweed that's down along the harbor that's just decaying. And it's, one of my guys today said it smelled worse than our dewatering process. So that's how bad it is. But just so you know, we're on top of it. We're responding to the calls that we get, but there's no sewer issues. So that's it. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Are there any comments or announcements from the board members? Okay. We don't have any follow-up from public comment from last time, and then we do have public comment tonight. I think there's probably a few people here who are desiring to speak. I just wanted to go over a couple of parameters. When you come up to the mic, please state your full name. You'll be limited to 3 minutes. Please do not be repetitive if you're here to speak on the same issue as someone else. And we will be responding to the comments at the next meeting, not this evening. Penny?
Oops, can you hear me? Yeah. My real name is Penelope Dye, but you know me as Penny. I'm currently the president of the Nantucket Association of Real Estate Brokers. And I have to say that we were originally led to believe we would have a seat on the short-term rental work group. Then we were told it would be a non-voting seat. And now there's no seat at all. And it's fairly disappointing to me that we are, who are on the front lines of this industry, will not be able to participate in what should be a balanced discussion. We have the most accurate and the most current data, and it's quite frustrating. My question to you, I understand it was what the state requires. I am also perplexed why, for instance, some affordable housing groups have representation rather than somebody from this industry. My question to the board is, there are 3 at-large seats. Will anybody in the real estate industry who applies for one of those seats not be considered?
Yeah, but
The town council reached out to the State Ethics Commission, and it is our understanding, based on that dialogue, that people who are employed in the real estate industry are deemed to have a conflict of interest.
I would suggest that other people on some of these other committees have very much more clear conflicts of interest than people in the real estate industry. Thank you.
okay, we can respond further next week.
Hi.
Hi.
Does this work? My name is Joanna Townsend, and I'm wondering if anyone can enlighten me to where the town personnel board went. Chapter 33 of the town bylaws is titled Personnel, and section 33-5 specifically addresses a personnel board that consists of 5 members, 4 appointed by the select board, and 1 is a non-union permanent town employee chosen by a representative annually by the town non-union employees. In searching news articles, I found that the personnel board was very active in the mid-90s and noticed a real dwindling of action in the 2000s. It led me to believe that there must have been a dissolution of the personnel board, so I dug further and found nothing. I mean, there are minutes from 1978 on the town website and references to the personnel board in a news article in 2008, but besides that, 0. When I spoke to the public records officer, the HR generalist, and the HR director, none of them had any recollection of the personnel board. Yet I see it in the town bylaws, and this section has remained there for years. In fact, it was updated as recently as 2020, which makes it seem like it's a valid section of the town bylaws. So where is it? With all the happenings the past few weeks regarding our fire chief search, one would think that this would be the perfect avenue for a personnel board to step in and assert their oversight into such a process. Although some may say a personnel board is antiquated, and some towns have in fact dissolved them, the bylaws outline the duties and responsibilities which are essentially what our community has been demanding of our select board. The duties and responsibilities of the personnel board are to review the personnel policies of the town, review the compensation policies of the town, review and monitor the classification plan, investigate and make recommendations concerning proper classification of any employee, investigate complaints, problems, and adequacy of personnel policies, practices, and procedures, among other things. So if this board still exists, when was the last time a vacancy post was published? If it was dissolved, who made that decision and when? Were the responsibilities absorbed into town departments without the community or public getting to have a say about it? If it is in fact defunct, who has taken on those responsibilities? Who played the role in the fire chief search and the application review? Who made that decision, and how does a bylaw change? And if this bylaw was changed, why does it remain active in our town bylaws? While I appreciate that I likely won't receive any answers tonight, please know that I will follow up in writing, and I look forward to hearing the deep history of the town personnel board that I very much believe needs to be an active part of our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Perfect, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Burton Balkine. I want to talk sharks. First, I want to thank the town manager and the harbor master for getting back to me in a very timely manner in a busy summer. I got response from the harbor master on the policy, and I understand it's public safety first, but I think we need to review the policy going forward, because the ATVs are going up and down the beach, scaring people, saying there's a shark in the water, there's a shark in the water. There's a hammerhead this big in the water, and they're getting everyone out. And also, I think from a policy perspective, I don't know if all the members of the harbor master crew are on the same board, because we were getting mixed signals from different lifeguards coming to our beach during the course of the day. I know there's a lot of staffing issues, and I'm not trying to beat up on the harbor master at all. I just want to have a coherent public policy and that we can move forward with. That's I want to say about that. I'd also wanted to, it's a totally different subject, all the different little scooters and bikes and these things, I don't even know what they are, hovercrafts, are on our roads. And I know you guys are reconstituting the pedestrian committees. I think that the board might want to take a little bit of a leadership role in that and try and we need to get a handle on all, I mean, literally I had I don't even know what they were, things passing me on either side, on sidewalks, these things that look like dirt bikes on the bike path. I don't know if you guys have seen them. And I just think we're gonna get ourselves in a lot of trouble, accident-wise, if we don't kind of nip this in the bud. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Hello, folks. I'm Steve Trnavish. I'm here to implore this board, please think and take a minute, review this fire chief selection mess. Guys, this is one you need a mulligan on. You have a highly qualified candidate right here that it has the respect of not just the men and women who serve with him in the building adjacent, but of this entire community. The support for him has been overwhelming. To ignore him as a candidate is a travesty. I would ask you, the members of this board, to take some time, go and speak independently with the various people who would serve under this new chief. Find out why they are so compelled to take the actions that they have taken, the brave steps that they have taken to ask for support for this candidate, this guy that they've worked side by side with for so very long. This is too important to mess up, guys. All right. The next great thing we're always looking for, and it doesn't always work out. We have a proven commodity right here. If this was a business, would you be doing this? Please, for the sake of this island, take my good advice. Speak with these people. Find out why they support this man so strongly. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes. Good evening. My name's Joe Townsend. I'm a captain and fire prevention officer with the fire department right next door. I wanted to thank Steve Tuna for his comments because that is how we all feel over there. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and of Local 2509, the firefighters of Nantucket. So here we go. Transparent, fair, professional, and just. These are words that cannot be found or used in any news story, social media post, letter to the editor, or email sent to the select board regarding the hiring process of the next fire chief of Nantucket. Crazy, unsafe, disrespectful, sneaky, sad, a failure of government, angry, disappointed, and detrimental are all words found in the previously mentioned frustration and failure of this hiring process. This has been described as by a hiring member committee as not a personal decision. Well, to Neil Patterson it is. Neil Patterson stated that the firefighters are in for a rude awakening real soon, real soon. He said that to Deputy Sean Mitchell, and he's also made that comment to 2 town employees recently at an event. You'll have your turn.
Yeah, let's not have personal attacks.
Thank you. Some of us have cancer. Some of us have job-related ailments that require regular doctor visits. Some of us have PTSD due to calls we've responded to that will be with us for the rest of our lives. But Mr. Patterson, whatever rude awakening you have in store for us, I'm sure we can handle it. These statements should overthrow any decision Mr. Patterson was involved in the hiring committee.
Okay.
After the Veranda House fire, we had a huge show of support from the community. Thank you very much. Thank you to the town manager for stopping by to wish us well and thank us for our service. Thank you to the business owners, restaurants, people dropped off cards, baked goods, dinners, and stopped us on the streets to say good job. Even the First Lady of the United States stopped by to recognize the work we had done. But you know who didn't stop by? Not one member of the select board. We are understaffed, and this is really no surprise. We are understaffed, underpaid, and under-equipped. We go years with no offers or offers of zero during town negotiations. We are aware the select board hasn't cared or been concerned with anything we do. Culminating to this moment, you have 15 days, according to Article 3, Section 3.4 of the town charter, to disapprove the recommended hire. We ask that you start the process over professionally and with a qualified panel, including a member of our union, and don't ask for our input on a decision that will affect us for years to come. Let us be part of that decision. There are 850 signatures on a petition, countless letters to the editor, to the Inquirer Mirror, and Nantucket Current. Social media posts have been calling for town government reform and change to be made. You are the elected officials. Listen to the people that put you in this position, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's disappointing. That's hearsay. I have never, ever said that.
Let's not do it back and forth.
Anyway, my name's Neil Patterson, and I'm a member of the at-large of the Fire Chief Search Committee. By way of background, I just retired after 20 years of service with the Nantucket Fire Department. As a coal firefighter, I was also president of the Firemen's Association and spent 10 years on the building committee that finally got the new station over there. Public safety is my number one priority. I have nothing but respect for the Nantucket Fire Department and their actions at the Veranda fire. I was there also. I also noticed the union didn't bother to put my name in the paper. That's fine. I get it. We're dealing with other things. The hiring process was laid out by a professional consultant in association with other neutral third-party experts, all of whom have decades of experience as a fire chief and with recruiting public safety professionals. The process was made clear to all candidates. An internal candidate was encouraged to apply, and I encouraged Sean to apply, with the understanding that he may not make it through the process. That candidate said he would work with whoever was hired. 18 applicants, the majority of which were some of the most qualified the consultant has seen in a long time. 8 candidates moved to the structured interview, including the internal candidate. 3 applicants progressed to the assessment center. All of the applicants are capable firefighters who can step in an emergency. It is important to hire the most qualified candidate. If we hadn't had such qualified candidates, the outcome might be very different. It is unfortunate the social media campaign is characterizing the hiring process, omitting or distorting the facts. It's not about petitions on Facebook. It's about hiring the most qualified candidate. I want to be clear. I have no horse in this race. I've retired from the fire department. 20 years seems like nothing. I am simply doing my due diligence as a member of this community, for which I care very much about. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments this evening? No, no hands up online. Okay, thank you all. No new business that I'm aware of. The comments will be followed up on. Approval of minutes, warrants, and pending contracts.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
No roll call. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Citizen departmental committee requests. Request of acceptance of a gift of Milestone Bike Park Repair Station.
Motion to approve with thanks.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Did you want to hear from Quinn at all? He came.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Go ahead.
What a fabulous idea.
Thank you. My name is Quinn Keating. I'm a local resident here, and I was seeking your approval for my service project. That's.
I'm going to put it up on the screen so everybody can see it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
If you don't mind. What made you come up with this idea?
During COVID, I was kind of like into biking, I guess. I don't know. I noticed that we didn't have one here. And I thought it was a pretty cool idea. So I thought it'd be a good idea to include it on the island.
Thanks. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, board.
Next up, Finance Department, request for approval of the sale of some general obligation bonds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on July 14th, in advance of the most recent Fed meeting, we undertook a permanent bond financing sale in the amount of $38,110,000. It's made up of 2 series as noted in the AIS. Series 1, which is tax exempt, was $33,740,000, and Series B, which is taxable for the Affordable Housing Trust and some property purchases, was $4,370,000. As noted, the Series A had 8 bidders. The low bidder was Fidelity Capital Markets. The net interest cost was 3.025, which was the lowest that Hilltop had seen in quite a long time, and was actually about 45 basis points lower than the sales that were completed on that day as well. So we get some very advantageous interest rates on the tax exempt sale, which should save us a lot of interest ahead of the most recent Fed action of raising the rates another 0.75%. So taxable, we got a net interest cost of 3.97, which is primarily right next to the coupon rate. Taxable is always difficult to get or drive a lot of premium and get a relatively good rate, but still favorable, and we think the timing was right at this time to sell this before rates continue to rise. So we're asking for favorable motions to approve the sale, and then at the end of the meeting, you can sign the notes and the bonds.
Is there a motion?
I'm happy to make a motion to approve. I know the motion is very long, so can I make the motion to approve as outlined in the agenda?
With the vote dated August 3rd, 2022.
With the vote dated August 3rd, 2022.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
None.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Town managers report, federal offshore wind.
Thank you. So first off, we are going to hear from Will Cook of Cultural Heritage Partners, the town's consultant for various wind projects. And I think he has a presentation to tell us through, and he is accompanied by Greg Werkheiser. Sorry, Greg.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gibson, and to the members of the Select Board. Thank you for letting us join you tonight. It's been some time since we've had a chance to be with you. I realize there are some new members on the Select Board, so Greg and I thought it might be useful to tell you a little bit about ourselves and Cultural Heritage Partners, which is the law firm that Greg and Miriam Werkheiser founded. Greg, would you like to lead off?
Sure. It's nice to see everyone, familiar faces and new faces, and it's a special pleasure to work with your town staff who are focused on figuring out how to deal with not to use the pun, but the tidal wave of development of offshore wind. We founded our firm 13 years ago. We started with just 3 attorneys, and we're up to about 22 people now, include both attorneys and subject matter experts, so that when we do represent clients, the law is not the only tool in the toolbox. We've been working with the town for a number of years now, including on your first encounter with the offshore wind, and things are getting more complex, but we're here hopefully to explain them in ways that are understandable, and be honest with you about what your opportunities and your rights and your leverage are and what they are not. Happy to take any questions, but Will's going to be leading our talk tonight, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. I've worked with Greg and Marion for the last several years prior to this. Prior to joining Cultural Heritage Partners, I was an in-house attorney at the National Trust for Historic Preservation. I've also been an historic preservation law professor for a number of years as well. So we approach this through the lens of historic preservation and using your historic assets to help you in your legal advocacy. Tonight's just going to be a very high-level overview, recognizing our time constraints, but I do want to save as much time to answer questions following the short presentation. So I thought it might be useful to share maybe some governing principles or guiding principles. One, we know that our federal government and state governments, including the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, have very aggressive offshore wind energy goals. They're often operating under very tight timelines. In Nantucket, more than any other community, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, is really at the epicenter of this development. It's certainly the first site of any offshore industrial scale wind farm with Vineyard Wind. And you are also at the forefront of climate change and understand what's happening there, and certainly appreciate and support the need for alternative energy sources. 2 of the laws that guide our work are important to mention, just to give some context to our discussion tonight. One is the National Historic Preservation Act. There are 2 provisions in there that help us help the town of Nantucket navigate the environmental review process for the permitting of offshore wind farms. And the first of these is Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, which requires BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and other cooperating agencies to identify historic properties, assess adverse effects, and find ways to resolve those effects through avoidance, minimization, or mitigation. Our preference is always for avoidance and minimization. Related to Section 106 is a special law that applies to Nantucket because, as you know, the town itself, including the island of Nantucket and Tuckernut and Muskegon Islands, are all part of a National Historic Landmark, the highest level of historic preservation significance in the nation. And because you are a National Historic Landmark, BOEM is supposed to use all possible planning to minimize harm. So you are subject to this higher level of scrutiny that BOEM is supposed to apply. Now, there's a related law called Nepa, otherwise known as the National Environmental Policy Act, but it operates more as an information gathering statute so the public will understand the environmental effects of a government undertaking that will have a major effect on the human environment. That's the triggering language for Nepa, but it doesn't dictate project outcomes and can't steer an agency or a consulting party toward a more concrete outcome like the National Historic Preservation Act can do. The end product of the NEPA review is a document called the Environmental Impact Statement. We like to think that the least harmful environmental choice is always made. That's not the case. Federal agencies have the ability to balance all sorts of competing interests, including development and economic interests against environmental protection. So unfortunately, under NEPA, even though the goal is to make sure everybody knows about environmental effects, the outcome is not necessarily the least environmentally protective alternative. And then a final point is, even though we always push and the preference is for avoiding harm to historic viewsheds and visual resources, there are possibilities for mitigation. So minimization of adverse effects can take the form of design changes to projects, materials that are used, the turbine arrays, but there's also the possibility under the National Historic Preservation Act to help offset adverse effects to historic communities where adverse effects cannot be avoided. So just to give, I won't spend much time on this, but just to help give some situational awareness to what's happening on the East Coast. And if I had a larger screen, you would see that along the southern coast now below Virginia, extending down to Charleston, South Carolina, along the Gulf Coast, and along the Pacific coast of the United States, the federal government, in cooperation with states, starting the same process that it began over 16 years ago on the East Coast in terms of identifying lease areas for offshore wind development. So as you can see, there's going to be a lot of activity and construction activity in terms of wind farms all up and down the East Coast, with a particular concentration in the New England area. Just to kind of hone down on the graphic a little bit more, this shows the farms that are closest to the town of Nantucket. And I'll just touch lightly on these. I know that the Offshore Wind Work Group has revised its website, include links to the same material. So you'll see these same graphics on that website. But just to kind of give you a sense of where these various projects are standing, just lightly touch on them for you. As you know, with Vineyard Wind, there was a settlement achieved with the developer. A offshore wind mitigation fund was created that can be deployed for historic preservation, land conservation, climate change, resiliency, and alternative energy purposes. That the fund advisory group has recently been formed. So I know you'll be hearing more about how the funding will be deployed in the future. Next up for your consideration is Mayflower Wind, which is, I would say, next in the permitting pipeline. that is going to require the town's attention. Permitting has just begun. This project is around 23 miles from Nantucket's coastline. The plan in the construction and operations plan, the developer is attempting to build up to 147 turbines, up to 1,066 feet tall. These are very tall turbines. They're about the height of the Eiffel Tower or large buildings that you might see in a city. And they're approaching some of the tallest turbines that we've seen built yet on the East Coast. We're seeing turbines at this level along the New Jersey coast right now as well. To give you an update on what we've done, because this is so early in the process, we've submitted on behalf of the town a document called a set of scoping comments to BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, to outline all of the important environmental review issues that BOEM has a duty to consider, including adverse effects to historic and cultural resources, as well as economic and other types of environmental effects. Those comments are taken into account by the agency in deciding which issues to cover in its environmental impact statement. We most recently sent a letter to the company itself, to the CEO and other principals with the company, requesting presentations on island to the extent that that's possible, with additional visuals. We firmly believe it's important for your citizens and for members of the community to understand what Mayflower's visualizations are going to look like, what the turbines will look like. We've only seen a handful so far. There's a link to these simulations on the Offshore Wind Working Group website. They're very difficult, and I'm not going to attempt to show it in this format on a big screen, because you really have to look at them from a laptop screen of around 11 by 17 inches. That makes looking at these in a format like this difficult. And you also are supposed to view the images from approximately 15 inches away from the viewer's eyes. So there are some visualizations for you to take a look at on the Offshore Wind Working Group website. They are not sufficient. They don't show enough vantage points. We're requesting more at different times of the day, and it will show the worst case scenario. So I wanted to let you know that we've made that request, and we'll continue to make that request. In terms of the next step, what we're waiting on next is for a draft environmental impact statement to be released from BOEM for consulting parties and communities like Nantucket to react to. We'll have a couple of months to digest it, analyze it, identify shortcomings, and submit comments pointing out any shortcomings that we have noted. And so, as I mentioned, that's not expected until January of 2023. The final EIS, or environmental impact statement, isn't expected until September of 2023. And then in terms of the Section 106 process under the National Historic Preservation Act, that is not expected to conclude until September 22nd of 2023. So there'll be a lot happening next year on this project, with the final decision expected from BOEM toward the end of October 27th, 2023. So as those of you who participate in the Vineyard Wind permitting process, you know there's a lot of hurry up and wait, a lot of periods of really busy activity and waiting, and that pattern is playing out again in Mayflower Wind. There are a couple of other projects just to put on your radar screen, but there's no need to take direct action yet, is Bay State Wind and Beacon Wind, which is an Equinor project. Neither one of these developers have submitted a construction and operations plan yet. So the permitting process for those wind farms has not yet begun. And so I don't have more concrete information to share. And I did want to touch on briefly a trio of wind farms of about 224 turbines that are off the coast of Rhode Island, namely Newport and Block Island. These are called South Fork, Revolution, and Sunrise. They're being developed by Ørsted. As far as we know, again, according to BOEM, and we're working with some visualization experts to do our own simulations to test out the simulations that have been provided. But what we understand is that these 3 wind farms will not be visible in any significant way in terms of Nantucket's viewshed in a way that they would harm Nantucket's historic integrity. That's because these are between 35 and 40 miles away from Nantucket. Turbines are getting taller. That could change the analysis. Right now, we don't have sufficient visualizations to show whether there would be harm. And so we will continue to request additional visualizations. But according to BOEM and the State Historic Preservation Office, the adverse effects are anticipated to be de minimis because of their distance from the town. So I wanted to share a little bit about the way we approach our work in advising clients in offshore wind farm permitting. We believe that energy sustainability is an urgent goal, but we don't believe that clean energy or alternative energy and historic preservation have to be mutually exclusive. And it's important to note that impacts on historic and cultural resources can be adverse, especially when your historic integrity depends on an historic ocean-facing viewshed. And adverse effects can arise in a number of ways. They can happen if you have offshore wind infrastructure built on shore, like you might see at the town of Barnstable. If you have undersea cables that are run offshore, you can also have adverse effects, as you're well aware, when you have huge turbines that appear in your viewshed off of your historic coastline. We've done a lot of work gathering literature, working with a damages expert to help review this literature, and wanted to share that the studies we've reviewed and that are credible show that there are negative impacts on tourism, which can be felt most keenly by communities like Nantucket, places like Newport, Cape May City, New Jersey, any place, the town of New Shoreham, on Block Island, that depend heavily on cultural tourism, where there's a high concentration of heritage tourists that often don't return when the authenticity or brand of an historic place has been damaged. And we'd be happy to share with you copies of those studies, and so that you can share them or have them available for review on your offshore wind landing page. But holding all this aside, we believe that a balance can be struck. We believe that there can be success through participating in the environmental permitting process when there are hurdles or roadblocks with agencies, and Greg can share more about this. It is sometimes possible, as the case with Vineyard Wind, to reach agreements outside of a permitting process that is not operating as it ought to according to law. And then finally, sort of a final principle is that the developer should bear the risk of loss or bear the risk of harm from negative impacts, not historic communities that in most, if not all cases, don't stand to gain any direct benefit from the externalities or the costs of having offshore wind right off their shorelines. So, and we'll leave some time in Q&A in just a second, but I wanted to share with you what we're seeing across wind projects, not just in Nantucket, but across a number of those projects that I showed you in the earlier map. BOEM, like it did with Vineyard Wind, is skipping steps. It's not identifying historic properties as it's supposed to under the National Historic Preservation Act, which means that its assessment of adverse effects is necessarily incomplete. And moreover, the resolution of adverse effects is incomplete because of these skip steps and legal errors. One of the things that we hammer on as your advocate is that BOEM has a duty to identify all adverse effects, whether they're direct, indirect, and cumulative. One of the big problems that we're seeing across all wind projects is that BOEM is not considering all reasonably foreseeable cumulative effects as part of its Nepa or 106 analyses. And this is a major legal error. Another unfortunate pattern is that BOEM continues to cherry pick random properties to look at or to conduct visualizations of, but leaves out others. Existing visual simulations are they're not adequate. They're not necessarily accurate. And they often show the best case scenario for a developer as opposed to the worst case scenario, which communities are entitled to know and which BOEM's own guidelines require them to provide. And then, as I mentioned earlier, BOEM's duty under the Section 106 and Section 110F process of the National Historic Preservation Act impose a duty on it as the lead permitting agency to resolve all adverse effects, including cumulative effects. And a final point is that mitigation must be appropriate to offset harm. One thing that BOEM and developers are doing right now to other National Historic Landmark communities is minimizing the harm and suggesting that, for example, for the Ocean Wind project, which is right off of the New Jersey coast, right in front of Cape May County, New Jersey. It's 30 miles of oceanfront with dozens, if not hundreds, of historic or National Register listed or eligible historic properties. BOEM has just issued its finding of adverse effect for that project, which will be one of the largest ones in the country, and found that there will only be one historic property affected on that 30 miles of coastline where the turbines are maybe 15 miles away, and has offered as mitigation to prepare an historic structure report for the owner of that building. In Newport, which is has a large National Historic Landmark district and is ocean facing, in another project called Revolution, the developer there has proposed to prepare an historic property guide as mitigation for all the adverse visual effects that the city of Newport is expected to experience as a National Historic Landmark, and offered to help create a stormwater management plan that only affects a part of the island that isn't even within the view shed of the wind turbines. And the part that is on a cliff and doesn't have a stormwater management problem. So I think you maybe get the flavor of how things are evolving in terms of the permitting process and why it's important to be present at every step of the environmental review. As I mentioned too, we remain keenly focused on cumulative effects and how each project can add to the impacts of a single project, and continue to press BOEM to consider all of these effects, not just for purposes of NEPA, but also for purposes of the National Historic Preservation Act. So, Greg, if it's okay, I might turn it over to you to talk a little bit about what we work towards in terms of results as participants or as advocates for the town of Nantucket and the environmental review process.
Sure, and to set everyone's expectations, I think this is either final or semifinal.
Yes.
Consultation, when it works, leads to a meaningful exchange of honest and complete information between three parties. The federal regulatory agency, which is supposed to ensure the integrity of the exchange of information, the impacted communities, and the developer. Sometimes consultation works, sometimes it does not. And of course, whether it works depends on human leadership at agencies. So just as an example, the Army Corps of Engineers has traditionally not been great as a regulatory agency from a perspective of doing right by communities. The Department of Transportation tends to be a little bit better, and then a lot of agencies fall in the middle, frankly, depending on who's in Washington. BOEM right now, we would contend, was doing a better job of at least staying out of the way of dialogue between the company and between the developers and the community in the previous administration. Consequently, when the consultation process broke down from the perspective of your community staff, who felt like, hey, we're not getting consulted, we were able to solve that not through litigation, although that always remains an option. We were able to solve it to the community's leadership's satisfaction by reaching an agreement that did two sets of things. The first is we focused on the non-monetary part of mitigation, which is how can we change this project, the design, the orientation of the wind turbines, to eliminate or reduce as much harm visually to your historic landscape as possible. So we negotiated for things like adopting a paint color that's known scientifically to fade into the distance, adopting a very expensive lighting system where the blinking lights only come on when radar detects planes coming in, as opposed to blinking at night all year long. We negotiated for the first whole row of turbines, the most visible ones, to be moved to the back of the lease area. We took it as far as we could, given the timing in which you hired us and the pressures of the regulatory process. And then for the harms that could not be resolved, i.e. there will still be visual harms, we negotiated really a record amount for 106 settlements in the United States, which was then discounted to net present value because the town didn't paid out for these funds over the next 30 years of the project, but wanted them advanced. And so that led to the creation of the fund. I would like to claim that Will and I are geniuses who invented these community benefit agreements on our own. I certainly think we've improved them, but these occur in Europe on a regular basis between offshore wind developers and communities. They do not reach the level of sophistication in terms of content and financial mitigation as what we negotiated here for in Vineyard Wind. But you know, there's new precedents to be made as offshore wind develops in the US, because in Europe, they're building these turbines further and further out to sea with greater technology. And in the US, they're really close to shore. So Europe is a model to a limited extent, and then we have to kind of figure it out here on our own in the US. And the advantage we have is that we're looking at, if not involved in, from a client perspective, the developments up and down the East Coast. So we have a bird's eye view of how things are working or not working in terms of BOEM's consultation in other projects as well. So bottom line is, as BOEM messes up, if I can be that direct, it creates a record. And if they don't fix those mess ups, that record becomes the record for litigation, unless BOEM and or the developer figure out a way to better assure you that the impacts on your economy over the next 30 years, that you have the resources to be able to deal with those. So that's what we're aiming for, is your satisfaction as much as possible that we've struck the balance between the significant political pressure up and down the line in a bipartisan way for offshore wind, and on the other hand, the absolute imperative of protecting the resources around so much of which your local economy and your sense of character in the community is built. So we're happy to take any additional questions. Or any questions at this time. And thank you for your patience.
Hi, good evening. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Hi, Amy DeCibio. Thank you for your presentation. I have two questions. First of all, I looked at your website earlier. It's very nice. It's with respect to your bio, Mr. Cook, it says that you've had a successful record for protecting national historic landmarks, significant landscapes, historic view sheds, et cetera, et cetera. Was there ever a point in this process with Vineyard Wind where we were actually trying to protect Nantucket, or did we just get right to negotiation for mitigation?
No, there was always, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Just try and direct the questions through the chair.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was supposed to ask them a question. Sorry.
Will, go ahead.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, so the goal has always been to avoid and minimize harm. There are a couple of things I think that we have to keep in mind. These lease areas that we're dealing with now were created really with no objection over a decade ago. And they were auctioned off, public auction by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. And so we're left with these lease areas. The second thing to keep in mind is that there's no law that can prevent the building of the wind farms. Nantucket is lucky in that as a National Historic Landmark, it has the legal leverage of the National Historic Preservation Act to help, through consultation, try to find ways to avoid, minimize, or mitigate harm. But when Congress created that law in 1966, it didn't allow it to stop projects. It's specifically designed to balance historic preservation with economic development. So, I mean, personally and professionally, yes, my goal is always to try to avoid harm, but the National Historic Preservation Act does not mandate that outcome. It allows minimization or mitigation. So as Greg mentioned, we worked very hard to get contractual guarantees that would minimize harm in significant ways. And for harms that could not be avoided because the wind farms will be built, we worked to negotiate a deal for Nantucket for funding that could be deployed to help offset unavoidable adverse effects in areas connected to historic preservation.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add, it's a great question, is there are other countries that have project killer laws. The United States is not the worst, nor unfortunately is it the most advanced in terms of the legal protections it has when you're balancing preservation against development. Having said that, it is our job to make it as incredibly difficult as possible for the developers in BOEM to skip the legal obligations that they do have. And what was happening back at the beginning of Vineyard Wind, and what frankly is happening now on a much larger scale, is, and we've been telling BOEM this directly in multiple ways, that they're probably overwhelmed from a staffing perspective, and they're not serving the regulatory role and holding the company developers' feet to the fire. So it's our job to use every rock in our slingshot to be able to cause the process to live up to the obligations it does have.
Can I ask
Thank
my
you.
second question? So
Yes.
I'm not sure how I do this to talk to them. Do I just ask you the question and then they respond for you? Okay, thank you. Dawn, thank you.
Yes.
So sort of as a follow-up to that, then I'm a little bit confused. In the Good Neighbor Agreement in section 5.3, that's put up on our Nantucket website, nantucket-ma.gov website, where the Good Neighbor Agreement that was signed between, I believe on our side, the Nantucket, Town of Nantucket, County of Nantucket, the Nantucket Preservation Trust, and the Mariah Mitchell Association on one side, Vineyard Wind on the other. Section 1.3, 5.3, and maybe I'm reading this wrong, but I'll just read it really quickly. The Nantucket parties shall use their reasonable best efforts to inform federal, state, and local elected officials of their support for the projects as part of BOEM's National Environmental Policy Act in Section 106 and Section 110F. So we just talked about earlier that Section 110F was very, very scrutinizing, a very, very tough a protection that Nantucket should have, but this reads to me that Nantucket is supposed to support this project and waive our right to push back on it. Is that what this says?
No, that's respectfully. The only way that you are obligated to support the project is if they do every other single thing in the agreement. So only if they make the design changes, only if they spend the additional money to lessen the lighting, do the painting, move the turbines back, only if they continue to be more open and transparent in the provision of documents as these new turbines are developed, and only if they make a historic investment in offsetting mitigation, then are you required to support / not oppose the projects.
Okay, so
process.
I
So
understand,
this is-
but those are
this is
minor
standard.
things. So basically, we
Let's
agree
not
to
have a
having,
back
I'm
and
sorry,
forth.
I'll talk to you, don't appreciate, I'm sorry. So I just want to make sure I understand that. So in exchange for us painting the blades gray and eliminating the first row, which was 3 turbines in a turbine park that's going to be 1,600 turbines eventually, and a few other little things, we've waived our right to push back against section 110F and 106. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct.
So what does that say?
Thank you, Greg.
Is that what I thought you just said? Okay.
No, you're asking me if what you just said, that the first row of turbines was 3 turbines, and if.
I'm asking you if the mitigation, all those mitigation options, you're
Yeah.
basically saying once we've accepted those terms, then we have waived our right to push back against section 110F and section 106. Is that correct?
Unless they do not live up to their legal obligations.
Okay,
in
it's
which
correct.
case
Okay,
they-
thank you. No more questions.
I'd like to finish my answer if I might.
Yes, please, Greg, go ahead.
Thanks. They are required to continue to abide by the law. And what you characterize as little things are really the first time that's, many of those are the first time that industry has ever been compelled to do those things, whether here or in Europe. And, we may quibble over the investment that the company was eventually forced to make, but it was the most substantial investment securable under these laws that I'm aware of in the United States, with one exception, which was a project that was done by Dominion Power in Virginia. Otherwise, there is no, unlike the system of wetlands mitigation in the United States, where over the years there has been kind of a formula that's developed. There is no such formula for 106 visual impacts, and certainly none for visual impacts. So we're inventing this as you go along, and to suggest that those were small changes is inaccurate historically. But thank you for your question.
Thank you, Greg.
Good evening,
Go ahead.
Madam Chair. My name is Veronica Bonet, and I also have several questions about the Good Neighbor Agreement and the development. One question is, do you, I think I know your answer, but do you think that the Section 106 process for Vineyard Wind was adequate? There are places on the East Coast, Montauk secured a 35-mile distance from any turbines. I think Kitty Hawk, near the Outer Banks, has 27 miles before they'll see view sheds, and Nantucket has a little less than 15 miles. Since the Good Neighbor Agreement was signed, even though they took the 3 away from the first, the turbines have grown by 30%, from 637 feet to 800 and something feet, kind of negating that moving of the first row from a visual standpoint. The projects beyond Vineyard Wind 1, which I think are part of that Good Neighbor Agreement, for instance, Park City Wind advertises to people in Connecticut, you won't see these wind turbines from anywhere on the Connecticut coast, but you'll get all of the renewable electricity. So I'm just wondering if you think that the Section 106 process was adequate for Nantucket.
No, that's why we were hired to either enforce it or to be able to reach an agreement that was satisfying to the community. And the alternative, if you look back historically, the first wind farm ever proposed off the United States consisted of at least 10 years worth of tens of millions of dollars worth of litigation, and it eventually failed under its own weight. That is not the circumstance that we're operating here, because as Will pointed out, the lease area in which these companies have purchased the ability to build, that public process, which dictates how far from shore the farms are to the communities in the way that you just described, that process occurred 12 years ago, and any legal remedy to challenge those lease areas was ripe 12 years ago. Now, not to be critical of anyone 12 years ago not having the foresight as to what was coming, but that battle about the lease areas and what they can technically build in was in some ways constrained long before you or we or the current select board was ever around. So to say, for instance, that we can now renegotiate the lease areas and ensure that all these turbines are built beyond 40 miles, which is the rough approximation of when you see them visually, that we would be lying to you if we said that there is a legal mechanism to renegotiate the lease areas and make them not visible. You know, lawyers have the obligation to tell you the good stuff that they can do, but also the limitations. And we're telling you that that is, there's no direct challenge. Now, will some of these projects fail? Like, for instance, some of the natural gas pipeline projects have been stalled and failed under the weight of thousands of lawsuits? Perhaps, but this is a more complicated political landscape than dealing with fracking and natural gas than it is offshore wind.
Yeah, and just to clarify, the distances you mentioned from Montauk and Kitty Hawk were not achieved through any kind of negotiation. These distances were dictated by the state and the federal government when the lease areas were drawn. So are there places in the country where turbines will be further out, and appropriately so? And the answer is yes. That wasn't the case when the lease areas were drawn off of Massachusetts and Rhode Island.
Thank you. I do have another question. It says in your materials and on the town website that the support for renewable energy and for offshore wind is a given, and that due to climate change, we're in support of this. That makes me curious. Have you seen any data, since none has been made available publicly, that after the fossil fuel required to construct, maintain, operate, and balance with a constant fossil fuel energy source, that there is any significant benefit to emissions? And if so, what?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me be clear about our perspective. What we're saying, support for renewable energies is out there. We're not giving you our personal analysis of whether it's good or bad relative to others. What we're saying is your elected officials at virtually every level and across party and from state, local, and federal, there is a significant level of pushing for this offshore wind development among them, not universal, but we're simply acknowledging, we're doing two things. We're acknowledging the reality that this is a challenging regulatory environment, because it's an honest thing to do when we're laying out both the challenges and the risks for you. And we're also taking what I think is a strategic position in the following way. The industry, one of the ways they attack communities and delegitimize their concerns is to say, oh, they're a bunch of NIMBYs, they just don't want this in their backyard, or everybody who lives there is a millionaire who's got tons of property. This isn't really about working class people, or they're putting their interests above the interests of saving the earth. We've heard it all as an excuse for them not to live up to their legal obligation. So I think it's from a negotiating perspective, it's smart to declaw those and simply say, look, this isn't a case where we're attacking the need for renewable energy. We're not attacking that the United States has the need for renewable energy, but it is a false choice for industry with BOEM's consent to tell you communities, you can only have one or the other. You can only save the earth with these wind turbines or industrialize the Atlantic seaboard and be looking at these things for 30 years. Those are your only choices. That's a lie. That's a lie. And the way the US government set up its federal laws is to seek balance. Right now, that balance is off in favor of the developers, and we're trying to bring it back into balance.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Another question, do you believe the impacts to Nantucket's historic views has been made widely available to the public? It said in one of today's papers that the people on Nantucket largely universally support this. In talking to people, mostly says they don't know about it. Almost everybody I talk to doesn't know about it or has a misconception about it, including someone that was here tonight. So my question is, has it been adequately distributed? And I know you said you didn't want to show the BOEM simulations. I wish I had known that. I had heard that those would be up on the screen because we've printed them in poster format. And I think when you're discussing something like this, those visualizations should be available. And the fact that they're not is just kind of a perpetuation of not letting people know what's coming.
Yeah, no, the answer to your question is no. We do not believe that the visual projections that have been developed to date for the projects that are forthcoming meet our standards yet, being satisfied that they are accurate. We do not trust the companies. We have engaged our own professional consultants to independently develop visual simulations so that when we are sure they are accurate, we will be the first ones running down the street showing them. The problem with showing them now is that we are not sure they're accurate. BOEM has adopted some additional precautions that weren't present a year or two ago. They are taking documents that should be publicly available and not making them publicly available, including inventories of impacts on historic resources, which if you've got a sensitive resource like a tribal burial ground, you can redact it, but you still issue the report. Right now, they're hiding the full report. So the answer to your question is no. People absolutely do deserve to have accurate visualizations. And the primary fight that we're having up and down the East Coast is the inadequacy of the visual simulations that the companies themselves are producing.
Yeah, just to be clear, the Mayflower visualization links are on the Offshore Wind landing page. My point is that I can't present them to you accurately using Zoom from a virtual point of view. I could blow them up and show them what they look like, but that wouldn't be presenting them accurately. So I'm sorry that I can't be there in person to hold up a poster board, but the visuals are available on the town's landing page. And as we get more available, we're insisting that BOEM develop more and that developers produce more. They will be made available too. We've also asked for Mayflower to come make presentations on island to help make these visuals more readily accessible.
Thank you very much for your time. And I want to make sure that the board knows that there will be no place on the South Shore of Nantucket where you can look to the left or right if this is built as the lease area is drawn, that you will have an unobstructed view of the horizon. And it does say in our historic landmark status document that that is why people came to Nantucket, and that the unobstructed view of the horizon is a balm to the soul. We will no longer have that. There will be nowhere where you can have it. In fact, you will be able to see these from Great Point. You will be able to look towards Nantucket and see these. The public 100% is not aware of this. They don't know, and we have an obligation to tell them. Thank you.
Didn't we have a presentation where
Yeah,
we
there-
showed the visualizations?
Yeah, there
I
were.
mean, I'm just making sure my memory is
Yeah,
correct.
there were presentations. Lauren could talk to them. I think the one thing people have to realize is this is like the only thing that the Republicans and the Democrats agree on. And there was no way that, we could insert ourselves at the point that we were at and stop this. Now, maybe a lawsuit or someone else will drag it out, who knows? But we made the best, in my opinion, we had some of the best work and best advice that we could have from this group. Because it was a runaway freight train that was going to happen regardless. And I think that's really important for people to understand. This wasn't people not paying attention. This wasn't the select board or us being too busy. We actually, if you listen to these guys, we had very good representation and they are doing their best for us. We started some of the conversations with, we don't want them at all. And unfortunately we got back, well, you can try that, but this is what will happen. You're going to get them. So I think we have to be realistic. What is it that we can do? Now, maybe in future, there'll be, and Lauren is talking about this and the work group is talking about it, there may be other benefits to the island in future on some of the other ones that are coming. But right now, this is, they did, for the first, I think they did really well.
Carl?
Through you, Madam Chair, Carl Borchert, to these two individuals. Just a quick question. Have you considered going forward after the community host agreement with Vineyard Wind 1 to secure, or as the town manager or the select board asked the two of you as the firm that's working on this for the town to secure community host agreements with Commonwealth, Park City, Mayflower, Beacon, Bay State? Those are the ones in our zone. By my math, Vineyard Wind closed financing last year to begin construction, and they made a payment of $4 million that's being administered by the Community Foundation of Nantucket for the island. And they're going to make 3 more for the total of $12 million over the next 6 or 7 years to sustain the $16 million commitment. It would be one perspective that I could offer to this discussion, that if you negotiated community service agreements with the rest of those wind farms out there, we could get over $100 million for this island, and we could help with rental assistance and fuel assistance, food insecurity, climate change mitigation, sand dune replenishment, road relocation, infrastructure improvements for the town. The list goes on and on, children's programs, educational schools, 100 or $150 million out of these companies with 6 or 8 different community host agreements might be something really serious to consider if they are in fact coming, which I think they are. And I just was wondering if you guys could answer that question. Have you been asked to look into community host agreements at this time?
Our charge is to first seek to enforce the standard consultation requirements of federal law. And if and only if the federal consultation requirements like Section 106 and Nepa fail to account for the community's interests, to look at whatever tools are in the toolbox to secure the community's interest. Now that could be litigation. It could be the right community benefit agreement. Community benefit agreements are not always the right solution, nor are they one size fits all, because as I'm sure you know, that was a discerning question. There are significant variances between these farms, turbine height, distance from land, et cetera, et cetera. So not to make a complicated answer to your pretty straightforward question, our charge on behalf of the community is to enforce federal law and to make sure that we use every legal tool in the toolbox to bring the type of pressure we need to make sure that your interests are served as best as they can under the opportunities and constraints of the law. Will, do you want to add something?
No, just that these permitting reviews will take place at different times. As I mentioned earlier, there are some in the pipeline, but the construction and operations plans have not been submitted to BOEM yet. So just from a due diligence standpoint, the town wouldn't be in a position to have that kind of negotiation without understanding what the farms would look like and what the build out would look like. So with a number of these farms, we're just not far enough into the regulatory process to be able to help steer you one way or the other.
And Madam Chair, just one quick follow-up. Vineyard Wind 1, Vineyard Wind was out here probably 6 to 8 times in the last 10 years with informational sessions at the corner table and the CPS cafeteria and other places. And they had poster boards of visual simulations multiple times. And the public was invited in the newspaper to come and see them. So lots of folks on the island did not respond to that. I went to many of them and they were not very well attended, but the company did put forth visual simulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. I'm going to take one more question from Bruce Mandel, who's online. Oh, and one more from Valerie Oliver as well. Bruce, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have 2 questions that I would hope that you could direct at the right party. One was, we heard about some non-monetary mitigation, and one item mentioned was a lighting system. And I wanted to find out from these gentlemen, and perhaps could ask them, this ADLS system affects the red lighting system, and I wanted to know, number one, has that system been approved for offshore use by the FAA and all the other agencies that would have jurisdiction? And does that system also control the white lighting at the base of these turbines? That's one question. The second question, if you don't mind me asking both at the same time, the Good Neighbor Agreement, I'm curious if that agreement, if the parties of that agreement are still the same as the original negotiating parties. Have the developer portion of that agreement been passed off, and the entities that they've been passed off to, are they fully transparent and not some kind of shell? So I'd appreciate some discussion of that.
Will, if you want to take the first question, I can provide the second one.
Yeah, sure. It's my understanding that ADLS is acceptable in terms of FAA regulation. There's a number of like advisory circulars the FAA has issued about it. So it's, I believe it's going to be fairly commonly integrated. And then to answer your other question, which is a good question, does ADLS apply to the light at the base of the turbine? And that answer is no. Those lights are on per Coast Guard requirements as a navigation safety measure. We've asked a lot of questions at BOEM consultation meetings about whether those lights are visible at a distance and have been told that they're not. I can't answer that with authority because I've not seen a visualization showing what those lights would look like. But the lower tower lights that are closer to the surface of the water are regulated and required by the Coast Guard, not the FAA.
Well, Will, before you go on, my latest conversation with FAA was the ADLS system is approved in certain circumstances for use on land. But as far as the person that I was speaking to recently, they don't know that it's been approved for offshore use. When you say that it's in use.
No, I didn't say it is in use. It's my understanding that there's not a barrier in terms of the FAA, in terms of it being deployed. This has been coming up in every single review and is, it's becoming a permit condition. So if there is some FAA issue, I'm not aware of that.
Is there any way to look into that?
Absolutely. Be happy to get back to you or through the work group, get you a message.
Okay, thanks. And my second question regarding the
yes, sir,
the Good Neighbor Agreement.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
As I understand your question, Mr. Mandel. It's has Vineyard Wind changed in its corporate form at all since Vineyard Wind, as the corporation, was the signatory to the Good Neighbor Agreement, in any way that would diminish Nantucket's rights under that agreement? The answer is no. Vineyard Wind, like a lot of these companies, renames their projects at various stages to distinguish them for marketing purposes or probably for tax purposes. The way we negotiated the agreement was that any inheritor, corporate inheritor of the original agreement is obligated to the full extent. And we made that very clear with Vineyard Wind's lawyers, that we weren't going to borrow your phrase, permit any shell games that would diminish their commitment over time.
So who is our current partner in the Good Neighbor Agreement?
Sir, you're catching me at the end of a day where I cannot remember exactly what, maybe Will does, what the new nomenclature is for Vineyard Wind 1. But I'm absolutely able to get that for you tonight and send it over to you tomorrow. My apologies for my failing brain at the end of a long day.
Understood. Thank you for your response. I look forward to the answer.
Yes, sir. Good to talk with you again.
Thank you. We'll take one more question or comment from Valerie.
Thank you. I think it's important to remember we're all in this together. So it's not us against you or us against them. We all need to band together because we all care about the island. This is our home. And I think it's important to understand all of the aspects of all of this stuff. It is something that's new to everyone. Vineyard Wind 1 is the first of its kind when it was being pitched, and I believe throughout the process, it's basically has been said, we're going to learn from our mistakes on this one. And I think, we need to understand that. And it would behoove all of us to read all of the information that's available. I have read the construction and operation plan for most of these that are coming up, and it's imperative for everyone to read and understand. There are things about these that are not good for us, and I think it's important to weigh both sides of the coin. We're being told that it's clean energy, and there's quite a bit about a lot of it that is not. And I would just say, please read what you can, ask questions, and be informed, because that is going to do us all the best at the end of the day with all of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on at this point, if that's okay with the board, to budget report.
Sorry, one thing. Lauren has an announcement.
Okay.
Good evening, board. I will make this quick. And Eric, I don't know if you can pull up the town's website homepage, but I just want to alert the community that the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources is now seeking public comment and feedback, not about sharks, about the energy code. They are updating the stretch energy code, and as a designated green community, Nantucket will be expected to comply and enforce this new code. So August 12th is the deadline for public written comments on any of the proposed changes. There is also a virtual hearing scheduled for August 8th for anyone to express verbal comments. All of the details on how to find this information, how to submit comments, what the new code is proposing in terms of HERS radar index scores, which are going way down, as well as a new opt-in municipal code with a solar PV requirement, which must be approved at town meeting. So there's two new stretchier stretch codes coming our way. So if you plan on new construction or a major renovation or addition project starting next year, this is something you should begin to talk to your builder, your HERS rater, your architects about. this is coming our way. So any questions, happy to field them, but all of the information is on the town's homepage. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you. And thank you, Will and Greg, for that very thorough presentation. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. We'll see you there soon.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. We have some end-of-year budget reports from fiscal 22. The general fund, Our Island Home, and solid waste enterprise. I think we're going to start with the general fund, and the finance director is going to take us through.
Oh, wait, all right.
So good evening and thank you. As you know, as we noted in the report that we sent, fiscal 22 revenues were a little over 125 million, which is a $13 million increase over fiscal 21, about $10 million over the budget, driven really by real estate collections, increase in motor vehicle excise tax, not only for the current year, but prior year collections, and local rooms tax, which when we were putting the 22 budget together, we estimated using just under $7 million in that particular tax to finance and pay for initiatives within the budget. And last year we collected a little, or the year that just ended in fiscal 22, we collected a little over $12 million, which was beyond anything I ever expected to be possible. We're not sure how it's going to go quite yet this year. The first payment will be in September, so that'll be kind of the benchmark against last year. Overall, revenue-wise, we continue to perform very strongly in pretty much every category. Filing permits were down a little bit with the HDC, but overall, everything performed as expected. In the detail, you'll notice that the other departmental revenue had a significant increase, primarily made up of a one-time additional payment by the airport approved at town meeting towards the outstanding obligation that they're paying back to us. General fund expenses, approximately 92% of the budget, a great majority of the savings within the all the categories, most likely including the school as well, is the fact that we have numerous vacancies that we weren't able to fill. So not only did that impact the salary line items, but it impacted health insurance on an extremely positive way this year as well. And then we're able to thankfully get some lower insurance rates than we had anticipated. So overall, the general fund had a very good year. We continue to thank all the departments for their hard work in monitoring their budgets. Erica, can you? No, that's fine. Yeah, forward. Just go to, keep going to the details there. That's the quarter, so go right to the next one, please, a year. So this just really details the breakdown of where we ended up on all the categories. I'm not sure if the board has any questions they'd like me to answer, but again, a little over 125 million, which is a very positive year. And hopefully we should be able to continue the moving forward with having some fairly positive free cash. I can tell you it won't be 19 million again, that's for certain, based on what we did with it at town meeting, but it will still be, we'll still have a fairly substantial amount to be able to contribute towards capital and continue the work that we've had and done.
Just wanted to note that rooms tax is really significant.
I know. And I really will look to the September payment for the first 3 months of this year to, in comparative against last year, to see where we think it's going to end up, because that's really the strongest indicator for us.
Just I guess maybe a comment masked as a question, but at what point do you feel comfortable starting to integrate the dependency of that funding into the general budget as opposed to free cash?
Well, free cash in the budget, as you remember, is only for one-time items.
That's right. And so I know we've been sort of placeholding that because we couldn't accurately project because the rooms tax was so new and COVID and all these things. So I'm just curious when we feel like we get our sea legs with it. Well, I think we've been slowly getting our sea legs because this year we moved the number substantially above the 7 million that we received for fiscal 23 based on the projections that we were having here. I still think that I don't know that 12 million is consistently where we're going to end up. So I still think that there has to be some caution, but I still think that the number is probably is above the 8 million we had received in 21. And
it may be an opportunity to use that for one-time expenses to supplement free cash as well.
Yeah.
Knowing that I still am not sure we've seen a normal year in terms of what that looks like.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess, it's just, I think an important part of our short-term rental conversation as you all progress with that, how those revenues can be used to supplement or offset some of the disruptions or community impact that short-term rentals may be having on the community. So I just think it's just a good comment to pay attention to as we go forward. But yeah, 12 million is pretty remarkable.
It is.
We've had a lot of discussions of trying to get to a point where that money is more directed towards like road infrastructure and
Right.
And year-round housing
That's
options.
right. Yeah. And staffing, I would imagine.
Well, and I also think that as the short-term rental work group works its way toward, does its work, and we sort of looking at the landscape of a lot of the source of that revenue coming from the short-term rental tax, that, if the community decides that some kind of limitations on that business are in order, that will impact.
It will.
That.
Yes.
So I think being cautious about folding it into the general fund until that question is answered too is really important.
Carry on.
If anybody has any questions about any of the details supplied behind it, as always, Erica, could you go a couple slides back farther down, please? Keep going. Expenses, go ahead, Brooke, sorry.
I just wanted to make another comment about employee savings, by not having people. It's great to save money, but we have to understand what isn't getting done because there aren't people to do it. So
Sure, and it's more just an observation that's
Yeah.
driving some of the reduction in the actual expenditures. All of those were planned into fiscal 23, and we're certainly working very hard to fill those positions. And as we do, that diminishes what we may be able to project as savings into the future. So it is noted. You can keep going, Erica, please. Keep going. Again, we do show the top 15 projects. Nobody Field, I think, is rapidly moving towards completion, which I think everybody will be happy about. Waite Drive is hopefully moving towards completion as well. We've continued work through the end of the fiscal year on our sidewalk improvement plan, roads, and various other school or other related projects. When we issued debt in June, and then again, the reaffirmation of the AAA rating when we issued the debt for July, Moody's still continues to think that we have all the characteristics of a AAA community, and we certainly agree with them. And all of the stabilization funds and the scholarship funds are invested long-term with Morgan Stanley, who does a very good job managing them in compliance with the investment policy that we have adopted, which we will be reviewing again this year. And as we noted, building permits does include HDC filings, which were down for the 3-month period, but it's something that we think is going to come back. So it's not something we're very worried about at this point in time. So and certainly any other questions, I'm happy to answer them for the board. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Our Island Home, and we have our administrator, Pedro Holden, here, and I believe Bob Eisenstein is remote. There he is. Hey, Bob.
Good evening. Yep. Good evening, everybody. This is my second time here, and can I just make an offer? It's tough following somebody like Brian. He's pretty impressive. Okay, so I'll try my best. Okay, I'm just going to go over the highlights of the fiscal 2022 year. We're looking at the financial resources. We're down 45% over the previous fiscal year, which they said it was 3 million, but it was like 2.8 million. That decrease is because of the prior year CPE receipts, which is the civil public expenses. I haven't gotten word about it. Maybe Bob has more information. Maybe we're going to get another receipt like that and I don't know which year that's going to be awarded. So also, if we take that out, we notice that the revenue is only down 5%, 191,000. And then we got some pretty interesting trends happening here. We get Medicare revenue and private patient revenue increase, with Medicare increasing at 49%, and we get the private patient revenue increasing 4%. So the revenue ended the year at 95% of the estimated budgeted revenue. And since this is my only 6 months here, I'm pretty impressed with what you guys accomplished, last year, fiscally. Then moving on to your expenses, total expenses for the year was $7,400,000, which is a decrease of $128,000, which represents only a 2% decrease over 2021. And the professional services were down 6%, which can be attributed to a decrease in utilization of the travel nurses due to the fact that trying to find people to fill those positions, I gather. And then other expense categories were salaries were down 1%, medical insurance was down 4%, and other supplies were down 20% respectively. Thus, expenditures were less than the projected annual budget, ending at 84%. So, and then I just want to go, excuse me, ma'am. Erica? I'm sorry, Erica, can we, yeah, this should be right there. If you go over to our island home revenues, I can see Medicaid pending, that's down over last year. And then you can see the trend happening on Medicare, that's increasing from over last year. Private patient pay, that's increasing, you can see that. And then the Medicaid, which is trending down, which is a good trend. Not saying it's going to stay that way, but it looks good. Okay, so Bob, could you take it over from here?
Yeah, certainly. Can everybody hear me okay? I was going to go to, yeah, this is good, right? Actually, the first page that gives you the annual review, I think you skipped over that, Peter. Let's go right back to that first page, if you don't mind. Yeah, right there. So basically, as Peter had suggested, the story here is that in spite of COVID and everything else going on in the facility with the decreased census, we came up very close to projected revenues. That $2.8 million that Peter referred to is for the certified public expenditures. So when you see that $6 million from last year, if you take that out of that number, we're, as Peter suggested, from that number. And the story here is the last quarter of this year, Q4, April, May, and June, was really a very strong quarter for us. We took in over $1 million in revenue, and I think that's a real milestone, and we hope to continue that. So if you just follow down to the end of this page, you can see that with all of the retained earnings and everything else put back in, we really do have a surplus balance going forward. So if you can go to the quarter report, the next page, right there. You can see here the $1 million that we took in revenue for the fourth quarter. And as Peter stated, if you the two line items that are critical, you look at $438,000 under Medicare. That's a significant increase from which you can tell. And so our goal for the facility is to get an increase in Medicare dollars and private pay dollars, because they're the higher paying residents in terms of reimbursement. Two things went into that. We've also increased our collection efforts significantly. So our accounts receivable is actually improved by about $242,000, which is almost the difference that you see there, that 275. So the short story is last quarter of this year, moving into July for next fiscal, if we can continue these positive trends, we should be over $1 million in revenue per quarter, which would be a very significant improvement. So next slide, please. And this just gives you the same thing carried over into the annual 12-month, pretty much the same story. You can see the differences are made up from that CPE money coming in from last year versus this year. Expenses, as Peter pointed out as well, we were at 95% of budget on revenue, and we actually saved money on expenses, considering it was 1.4 million, something like that, Peter. So we only hit 84% of that total budget, which is also significant given the COVID experience of the last year and a half. We can keep going the next slide. If there's any questions on the detail, I know the hour's late, please feel free to ask. The expense breakdown, as usual, payroll and benefits is our largest expense in the facility. Industry standards about 70%, so we're a little under that. We did have a need to, unfortunately, recruit some travel nurses again this year, which we had gotten rid of about 3 or 4 months ago. But as Brian pointed out, I think the same trend for the town is impacting the nursing home. Recruitment is very difficult. So the fact that we're under on our payroll is not necessarily a positive, but that's what happened last year. And you can see all the expenses are pretty much same or under budget, which is a good feat for the facility last year. Next slide, please. And here's where you can see the breakdown for the last quarter itself. And again, the same kind of comparison. 3% change, very minimal, considering, and the census was about the same or a little bit less. Next slide, please. Trying to read yours and mine at the same time. What do we have? So the operating expenses for 12 months ended June 30th. Okay. So again, the big difference here is the 191K variance in revenue. But you can see that 2.8 million is where the big difference was year over year. And if you take that out, it's still, it's not as bad. Next slide, please. Oh, that's a good one. Just a couple of parting comments. One is that I did want to publicly thank a few people. As everybody knows, it's been a very trying couple of years in the nursing home. And we all sit here, we don't have to wear masks, but every single person in the nursing home, you know, they still have to mask up all day. And there's been a lot of work done by a lot of people. I'd like to personally give a shout out to the certified nurses aides, in particular, Sophia Little-Liebert, and Carol Matson is one of the unsung heroes in the entire facility. Many of you might know her. She's been on island for a long time. She is our second in command nurse, and she sort of has been holding down the fort. The other good news to report is we have recruited a permanent director of nursing named Barbara Gordon, who's going to be started on August 22nd. And last thing I wanted to point out, there is some relief going on at the state level. The state legislature just passed a budget that's going to increase funding for Medicaid for all nursing homes. And what they're also doing is it's something we want to look into with the town to see if we can get money for recruitment and retention. There's going to be a lot of grant monies available. It's been approved by the legislature. It's waiting for the governor to give his final approval. So I just wanted to, again, give a big shout out to the staff who hung in there through a difficult time. And the last quarter of this year looks very positive financially, and we hope it will continue. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter, and also Bob. And Bob, I would echo what you said about the staff there. They are amazing. And I have always known that, of course, but I also have a relative there now. And it is really eye-opening to have somebody there. I think Brian wants to add something to the budget.
Yes, so I just wanted to give everybody an update because we did sort out the CP issue. The state actually neglected to send it to us timely. We did receive $1.5 million yesterday, so we did receive the CPE that we normally receive.
That's great.
Brian, is that 1 year? Or is it because you know how sometimes they're combined?
Right. That is for 1 year. The 2.7 that was received in 21 was for 19 and 20. So
okay.
Yep.
So that's very significant.
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you guys. We have the solid waste enterprise fund budget, and is that going to be a combination of Brian and Stephen Arsenault, the DPW director?
I think it's Stephen in case he needs.
Stephen's on.
Yep.
Hey, good evening, everyone. So, yay, my first quarterly review. Thank you, Erica. So I wish I could say that it was a really good quarter, but unfortunately our expenditures overshadowed our revenue. So we had a 7% increase in comparison to fiscal year 21 in revenue, but we had a 12% increase in comparison in expenditures, increased by 1.2 million. So that was a combination of increases in C&D, our collection and disposal, professional services, recycling, and MRF. Utilities were down and freight overall, but our operating expenses are pretty high. Next slide, please. And I really don't have much to add to the revenue. It is basically self-explanatory. We had to request funds. Well, I'm saying that but Brian, in order to compensate for going over budget, and that was by, let's see here, that was approximately about 800,000. We had also an approval for a transfer on July 13th for 500. So that combination brought us back into the green, so to speak. Next slide, please. As you can see, between the two fiscal years, it doesn't appear to be that big a difference, but we still experienced a slight increase in tipping fees versus even though we lost with landfill fees. Next slide, please. And this is showing our C&D volume, the purple bar. That's what we want to focus on for fiscal year 22. As you can see, it's increased over time, which is pretty normal. And in comparison to the previous fiscal year, it is much lower, but it's still an increase just the same for the year itself. Next slide, please. And as far as compostable waste, again, we had an increase over the course of the year as well. What we're seeing is we're seeing a lot of development and a lot more activity going through. Some people I'm sure have experienced lines going down nearly the entire length of Nantucket. So it's a great deal of activity going on as far as home improvement and development. And let's see here. And here it breaks down the reserve fund, our free cash, and the transfers that were used to assist us in covering the expenses for fiscal year 22. And next slide, please. And here are our expenditures, with the C&D obviously being the higher amount, which is the norm. And next, okay, and thank you. And we have it broken down into a bit more detail with our operating expenses. But this is without debt. And that's it. If there are any questions? Or if Brian would like to elaborate on any particular thing? Okay, that's all I have. Oh, that's not all I have. The team would like to thank everyone for the support, the kudos. I'm getting a lot of positivity from the community with our work crews. At the same time, please keep us honest if there's any concerns or any more praises, please feel free to call me. I really enjoy getting it. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no questions.
Nope, nothing from me either.
Thank you.
Okay, next, thank you all for those reports. The annual town meeting and annual town election timeline. So typically I prepare the timeline, review it with you all. Hopefully you endorse it. And then it does tend to change a little bit as we go because that's the nature of it. But basically, it's pretty similar to how it has been in past years. I don't know that I need to really go over it. There's not too much that I would point out other than the town meeting is scheduled, as we know, for Saturday, May 6th. And things are already kind of starting to happen a little bit in preparation for town meeting. I've started collecting ideas for town-sponsored warrant articles, and a couple of other departments have given them to me. I've made note of some of the things that have come up at the board level to put in there, and we'll start reviewing those in October and November. The citizen articles will be opening up in October and November as well. We'll have our usual town council sessions. I don't know what else you might want to know about it. In discussions with the moderator, it was agreed to start the town meeting on Saturday, May 6th at 8:30 a.m. Given that, there's all that beginning stuff that probably take half hour or more until we really get going, but get it. Idea is to just get it going. And so, yeah.
I had no questions or concerns. The timeline looked appropriate to me.
So what
Move to endorse.
Oh, sure. I'll make a motion to endorse the preliminary timeline for annual town meeting.
And I will second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Thanks.
Okay, select boards, reports and comments, discussion on short-term rental work group facilitator. And I will turn it over to you.
Okay. So Jason and I were tasked with setting up meetings and interviewing the two firms that responded to the request for proposals, or I guess it wasn't officially a request for a proposal. What's it called, Brian? Anyway, two firms responded, and they we would have been in good hands with either one of the firms. The distinction is Judy Barrett's firm, she does a lot of work in zoning and has a lot of subject matter expertise and does a fair amount of facilitation work in that arena. The other candidate, her name is Stacy, and facilitation on contentious community issues is her wheelhouse. It is the primary focus of her work. And so Jason and I went back and forth on how to get what we need, and I talked to Libby today, and what I would like to propose, Jason and I would like to propose, is that we hire Stacy's group to do the facilitation, and then execute perhaps a second as needed contract with Judy's firm when we get to the point of writing up the regulations and bylaws, which is her area of expertise. So sort of get the best of both worlds, and utilize each firm for their primary expertise in the area that we need them in the process. And so that's my recommendation, our recommendation, I should say.
I think that sounds really sound and smart. Thank you for taking the time to speak with both of them.
Yeah, it's great. Do we need to make a motion on that, or just?
I would suggest that you do a motion to engage Stacy Smith of the Consensus Building Institute for the facilitation of the work group, and to engage Judy Barrett as needed to help with any zoning issues, sort of a neutral third party subject matter expert type of thing. And then we will get contracts together and get them on your next agenda.
I would make that motion as Libby outlined for approval of the short-term rental work group facilitation contract.
And I will second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Committee reports? Anybody got anything?
I don't have anything to report. Likely my last Board of Health meeting was a couple of weeks ago, and yeah, so and I think there's an important meeting, a joint meeting with them on August 17th is being proposed for us to talk about short-term rental regulations. There may want to be some discussion because I won't be able to make every Board of Health meeting going forward. If anybody else on this board would like to sit on that, at least or until November's election. So I just leave that with you.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit earlier today.
Yep, and I have it on the draft agenda for the 17th to discuss the various seats that you sit on as the
Great.
select board representative and who could take those over.
Great. Thank you so much.
And well, thank you, Melissa. I'm really sad that you won't be up here with us anymore. And I mean, it was kind of crazy tonight that there's at this now after Matt left, all
Only
women
2
up at
minutes.
this table.
It's a poignant ending.
I should share.
Yeah.
So the community probably knows through the media that the housing bank bill did not make its way through the legislature this session. And as disappointed as we all are, we will soldier on and continue to work toward it with the next legislative session. And, progress is made. Media attention was stronger than ever to the issue, and hopefully the tide will turn in the next legislative session.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I just want to, I will be attending the meetings remotely as possible through November 2nd. And I will miss seeing all of your faces in person. So it's a joy to actually have been in person for a little bit. But I will make a motion to adjourn if there's nothing else.
And I'll second that.
Okay.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Got some stuff for us.